So good morning. I'm Gregory McGinnity. I'm the Managing Director of Policy for the Eli and Edith Broad Foundation. And I want to welcome you all to the 12th Annual Award for the Broad Prize in Urban Education. Before we start, I want to let you know that our morning's panel will be webcast and will be archived at broadprize.org. So to all of our remote viewing folks around the country, we extend an early morning welcome to you, particularly our friends in California who are up very early this morning. For the past 14 years, the Broad Foundation has been dedicated to achieving one simple goal: ensuring that every child in an urban public school has the opportunity to succeed. And we do this by strengthening public schools and creating environments where good teachers can do great things and where every student has the opportunity to learn. And across the United States, and especially in urban areas, too many good teachers are hindered by inefficient systems and outdated practices and inadequate resources. And at the Broad Foundation, we believe that every student should have access to a K-12 education that prepares him or her for a very fulfilling life and career. And we also believe that a powerful way to attain this level of universal preparation is to provide each student with a personalized learning experience that is tailored to individual needs, one that is paced appropriately, is engaging and collaborative with teachers and peers, and is based on the mastery of content, not just proficiency, but mastery. We're not just talking about computers in the classroom. Personalized learning means leveraging the best teachers so they can work with students at their individual school level. This is accomplished by changing our traditional view of the classroom from a room of 30 students who sit in rows facing a teacher who stands in the front of the classroom and delivers a one-size-fits-all lesson. What has happened historically is we teach too many times to the middle. The advanced students many times get bored because they already know the material. And the students who are struggling, they continue to fall behind. It's a system that doesn't work very well, and it frustrates parents and teachers and students. But this new personalized learning approach, which leverages the best of teaching with technology and enables teachers to deliver instruction to a student at his or her specific skill level. We find that the use of data, so teachers know exactly if a student has mastered a concept and how he or she learns best, enables a truly personalized learning environment. What this looks like is a classroom filled with activity. Teachers lead small group instruction. Students wearing headsets on computers to receive personalized instruction from adaptive software. Other students working independently. And in many cases, students in small, differentiated groups rotate across these learning stations throughout the day. Whole group instruction complements this model and provides experiences for students to learn and discuss common texts and concepts. Because human capital and financial resources are limited, and we know we face that every day, we believe that this vision will be realized through thoughtful integration of technology into an education system that will create these personalized learning environments. This integration will amplify the effects of great teachers and will give students and parents real-time information they need to become active partners in their own school experience. Personalized learning is a focus of the work that we have at the Broad Foundation. It's an area that we are most excited about because we believe that it has the potential to revolutionize what goes on in America's classrooms and to enable each child to reach his or her full potential. So we are especially excited about this morning's panel discussion. The conversation will explore the possibilities and challenges of what some consider the most provocative and the most promising educational reform today. To lead the discussion, we're pleased to be joined by Liz Willen, the director of the Hechinger Institute on Education and the Media, and the editor of the Hechinger Report, an award-winning nonprofit website that provides independent, high-quality coverage of education to news outlets throughout the United States. The Hechinger team has been particularly interested in covering the ways technology is and is not changing education. Liz is a former senior writer at Bloomberg Markets magazine, where she covered higher education, and she spent most of her career covering the New York City public schools for Newsday. So please join me in welcoming Liz Willen, who will introduce our panelists.
Thanks, Greg. I'm really happy to be here talking about this issue you call personalized learning. It's got a lot of names. It's referred to as blended learning, which someone said sounds a lot like a smoothie. Digital learning, another person said that sounds a lot like a thermometer. Personalized learning, blended learning, hybrid learning, customized learning, digital learning, student-centered learning, mastery-based learning. This is a new term. Education loves buzzwords. We have held about 5 seminars at the Hechinger Report. We used to train journalists in covering education, and there was a lot of interest in this topic, and the names and the definitions kept evolving. But there was always tremendous curiosity about how these new technologies, whatever you do call them, have the potential to reshape and transform education, instruction, and redesign schools to meet students where they are. We're very curious about that as well, and I'm sure many of you are as well. So before we get started, I'd really like to take a quick poll of who's in the audience. Please raise your hand if you're a teacher. And can you tell me if you're a principal or a superintendent of a district or a charter management organization? School board member. Okay, how many are from a government organization? And anyone from an education nonprofit or a foundation? Any representatives of an educational technology group or company? Please raise your hand if you're not any of these groups. That includes the journalists. Thanks a lot. We have a great diversity on this panel today. I'm really excited about it because we have 4 leaders from different perspectives and really different perspectives on personalized learning. We have a district superintendent from a major urban district, a charter school director, a policy expert, and a classroom teacher. I'm really happy to have a classroom teacher on this panel because I don't think you can really talk about blended learning, no matter what you call it, if you're not talking about teaching. So we're going to hear a lot more from each one of them. Each one of them is leading some form of blended learning work that we'll be able to hear a lot more specifics about. So let's welcome our panel. Thank you. I'm hoping my mic is working here. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm recognizing over there Alberto Carvalho, the superintendent of schools in Miami, mostly because he's been here a lot. 5 times a finalist for the Broad Prize, and last year, finally a winner. Did I get that right? 5 times?
That is correct. Felt like 50 times, but 5 is good.
And he has been a finalist 5 times. As I mentioned, Miami-Dade finally won the prize last year. They also won a $30 million Race to the Top grant for its plan to personalize learning for each student. Alberto's been in the district for 23 years, superintendent since 2008. That's, for urban superintendents, that's a huge amount of time.
Yeah, it's like dog years. Still standing.
And then we have Liz Aspire, the second Liz on the panel. She is Liz Arney, the Director of Innovative Learning at the Aspire Public Schools. And that's California's top performing large public charter system. It serves low-income students. And Liz has worked in education for 20 years, at Aspire for 10, as a teacher, instructional coach, and curriculum development manager. She leads Aspire's blended learning work. It started as a one-school pilot in 2010. Now there's going to be 34 schools. She's also converting a number of schools in Memphis, and we were talking about that earlier. So it's very interesting work. I love that they call it the Director of Innovative Learning. Isn't all learning supposed to be innovative?
In theory. In theory.
We also have John Bailey right here. John is the Director of Digital Learning Now. It's an initiative of the Foundation for Excellence in Education. That's the education reform organization founded by former Florida Governor Jeb Bush. He was the nation's second Director of Education Technology in the U.S. Department of Education. And we have our classroom teacher, Valyncia Hawkins, also known as V. Very interesting. She teaches 5th grade at Ambeers Elementary School in DC Public Schools. She is a graduate of that school system, and her children went there as well. Still managed to get in a little bit of trouble, even with mom in the same school, we found out. But she's taught there for 20 years. She received the district's Excellence for Teaching Award, and she was this year she won a City Bridge Innovation Fellowship, where she's piloted a blended learning program in her school that's really interesting, and we're going to hear a lot more about that later. Because this room is filled with people, we've laid out that there's so many different definitions of personalized blended learning, and I'm not sure what you all prefer to call it, but starting with Superintendent Carvalho, I'm going to ask each of you to sort of describe what got you interested in this, and please tell me the working term you use in your district. Is it blended learning? Is it
Blended learning.
And how did you get started in it? What excited you about it for its use in Miami?
Very simple reason, the recognition that across America, and particularly Miami-Dade, extremely diverse community, zip codes often define the level of access that children have to high-quality educational programs, digital content, or devices. And for me, if we're going to bring technology into schools, if in fact we're going to empower children, let's really change the culture and the learning environment around these kids. It's not just bringing content or technology, it's really changing the culture of classrooms and schools themselves. And the only way to do that, and this is well proven through research, is really to have aggressive professional development, having teachers really understand that this is an empowering tool for what they do. Simultaneously, it is an empowering tool for children, allowing them to depart from chronic units, bell-to-bell instruction, allowing for a different pace for different children, different modalities of learning, differentiated instruction. So the perfect way to capture all of that is through a blended learning environment where teachers are enablers of education. They do not rely on simply being in a position pushing out the information. It is the empowerment of students to pull in knowledge at their own pace, monitored through expert teachers in colorful, exciting environments with digital content that meet the children where they are and move them towards proficiency and beyond. Remediation and acceleration simultaneously happening in the same setting.
Liz, what about at Aspire? How did this innovative learning begin?
So we call it blended learning.
Blended learning.
And we really started exploring blended learning to see if it really was right for us, that we took kind of a healthy skepticism to it, but we felt like our students needed more technology exposure in our schools if they were going to college, and Aspire is college for certain for all of our students. And we knew that their lives would be day in, day out technology once they got to college. And so what we wanted to do was figure out what makes sense in our instructional program and how can we use technology to better support teachers as they differentiate instruction for our kids.
John?
Great. So we really believe blended learning is taking the best of technology and the best of teaching and really sort of merging the two together. In terms of individualized, personalized learning, we think sort of three things are usually taking place in those type of classrooms. When you have technology that's helping to differentiate the pace of learning, this gets at a little bit of the bell curve, that you have some kids that could go further on in a lesson, some kids that are right in the middle, some kids that are struggling with yesterday's lesson. This differentiates the pace, so the kids that can go on faster can move on faster, the kids that are struggling get a little bit more remedial help. It's differentiating the approach. Some students learn better through videos, some students learn better in small groups, some students need one-on-one instruction. And so often when you go into a blended learning classroom, you'll see all three of these different types of learning styles sort of happening. And then the third is connecting learning and the lessons and the content to the users, to the student, and the teachers' sort of interests and experiences as well. So if the student's really motivated by science or by being an astronaut, they're getting sort of more content teed up that's in that sort of genre. But it's a way of sort of connecting and making the learning more relevant and authentic to the student.
And V, this term blended learning didn't exist when your children were at Beers Elementary or when you were there.
No, it did not.
How did it come into your life and your teaching?
Well, I'm very fortunate to be a City Bridge Innovation Fellow, and through the fellowship is where I began to learn a lot about blended learning. As a teacher, I've been able to move students, but I haven't been able to move all of my students at the same pace, and I knew there was something missing. And as I've gone with the foundation and through the fellowship, I've learned so much that I think I found a way to reach every child at his or her level. And when you think about it, we are in the 21st century, and we need to teach our children as if they are 21st century students and not as 20th century students. And this has given us all an opportunity in which we can work with our students in the school environment, but also in the home environment, rec centers, libraries. This is the way we're reaching the children all times when they need it and where they need it.
It's great to hear. Liz, I'm going to ask you a little bit about Aspire's evolution in this area. It started with a project called Eris, after the Greek god?
A school called
Eris. And that school is where you kind of got started. It was in Oakland. It's a low-income school, high poverty school. And now lessons from Eris are really helping you launch the next phase of it. What was it you learned there that you're trying to replicate?
Well, what we started to do was we were piloting in 5 classrooms to really better understand what didn't we know about what it took to do this work. And so what we learned is that putting technology and vastly increasing the amount of technology in a classroom is a lot slower and a lot harder than we had originally thought. But what we learned from the classroom is that at the end of our pilots, our teachers said, this work is not less work, but it's more sustainable work. That for the past 2 years, every single student has moved up in student achievement, and that has been huge for our teachers. And so we have learned that if our teachers feel like the work is more sustainable and our student achievement grows, then it's the right thing for us to do as an organization for kids.
So it started small and it's getting larger and larger and larger.
So we ran our pilots for a year, and then we converted that school. It's a small K-8 school in Oakland. And since then, we have converted 2 other schools and are in the process of converting all of our Los Angeles schools to blended learning. And we've opened 2 new schools in Memphis, Tennessee this fall, and those schools are opening as blended learning schools.
Learning lots and lots of lessons along the way.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot to learn. It's not that we have figured it all out by any means, but I think we've got a lot of momentum on it. When our teachers who aren't in blended learning schools go and visit our teachers who are in blended learning schools, they catch the fever and get really, really excited about the potential for the kids. And they see kids are more engaged and teachers are able to differentiate instruction at a much better rate with much higher quality than they were before blended learning.
And V, obviously compared to Aspire, it's not on a scale of that magnitude where in your classroom, you're in a much earlier stage at Ann Beers. But you're leading the charge. And you don't have a whole network behind you, but you're figuring it out. And I'm kind of curious, as a veteran teacher who was not trained specifically in this, a little bit about your evolution, how you came to change and to view this concept as one that really works for the students that you have.
As I began to learn about blended learning, as a teacher who's been in the classroom for 20 years, I started to get excited again. I became the feelings that a first-year teacher feels, the thrill of watching students learn and getting students engaged.
But what about the first-year fear?
That fear, it's still there. It's still there. It's also there with the blended learning environment as well. And making sure that the structure and everything is in place and you're actually targeting the students that you want to target. But I'm so excited because the excitement level, the engagement level of my students are at a different place. My class has gotten louder, but the talk is what I call great talk. My students are talking to each other about what they're learning and how they're assisting one another. And that's what we want to do.
You've
with
got
our
fifth
students.
graders,
I
right?
have fifth graders. This summer I worked with 2nd through 5th grade in a math program. And that got me so excited that I've extended the pilot into the summer with actually 2 5th grade classes. My 5th grade, another 5th grade, and a 3rd grade class.
Do you think part of the reason they're so excited is because they've grown up with technology and now they're able to use it in the classroom in ways that help them learn?
I believe that's exactly why, because they are getting the opportunity to take ownership of what they're doing in their own learning. And they're excited. It's become an intrinsic value for them.
They also really know how to operate those devices at a young age, don't they?
They do. They do. And some of them are able to teach me some things.
John, for personalized learning, whatever we're going to be calling it, to happen in a much larger way than in an isolated classroom across a charter network with one superintendent that's really been able to pilot it, some things need to happen, both on the policy level and on the federal level. There's been some movement with President Obama's desire to unveil ConnectEd and to make sure we have even the technology and the internet connections in classrooms that don't. Because we visited some classrooms across the country where they're still very, very behind in that area. And so I'm wondering what's it going to take? How do we get this technology not only into classrooms, but what do we have to do on a policy level to make this happen?
Yeah, I mean, public policy is so critical here. I mean, it's messy, but it's so critical in terms of creating the room for innovation, whether it's in a charter school space or trying to convert traditional schools to converting into more personalized learning environments. But it's free. Public policy does sort of one of two things, sometimes both things. But it's getting rid of barriers to new approaches and to innovation. So a good example, we were just talking about this in the green room with the superintendent, but there's a lot of states that sort of narrowly defined what schools can do with instructional funding, and they can't spend that on digital resources or the devices that deliver digital resources or e-readers or so forth. And so it's creating room and eliminating some of those legacy barriers to innovation. It's also helping to accelerate innovation. So there are all sorts of things that public policymakers can do to sort of accelerate blended learning, personalized learning, and we're seeing that. State capitals tend to be almost the exact opposite of DC. DC is just locked in gridlock. And last year, we tracked 800 different digital learning bills that state legislatures were considering, and 136 of those passed and were signed into law, meaning that they helped create some sort of new opportunity for the use of technology to either empower teaching or to empower learning. The ConnectEd initiative that the president launched is really sort of an effort to modernize and update and refine the E-rate program, a program that's operated by the FCC that helps provide telecommunications and internet discounts for schools and libraries all across the country. This has been a great program, a great success in terms of connecting schools to sort of like very basic connectivity. Increasingly, what we need is a program that's more simplified. This is often the most complicated program that a school or charter school or a library will face in terms of the paperwork. So simplifying that, streamlining that, but also modernizing it. So it's really funding the next generation of broadband connectivity that helps drive personalized learning, that helps enable online learning, and that helps connect teachers, students, and parents to both resources and to each other.
But you've encountered obstacles. It's not easy to always accomplish this. What are some of the biggest obstacles we face going forward to try and...
Some of this is, I think there's still a healthy amount of skepticism, in part because in technology, those of us who have been involved in education technology sort of see this in waves, and there's been lots of promises that technology just hasn't really delivered, especially in personalized learning. You go back every decade and you can see how this particular type of technology was going to really be the game changer and differentiate and personalize learning in new ways. And always technology was lagging the promise. And this time, I think it's different, in large part because of two reasons. One, technology is actually ahead of the policy. For the first time, you really can differentiate on a student-by-student basis where they are in instruction and help bringing them up to where they need to be. And second, we have an explosion of entrepreneurs coming out of not just Silicon Valley, not just people leaving Google and Facebook and Microsoft to deliver new tools, but increasingly, I went to an innovative incubator in Silicon Valley, The entrepreneurs there were teachers, they were parents, and they were a school principal. So the barriers to entry to be an education entrepreneur these days are sort of lowered, and so people are taking on and solving these problems and creating new tools and services for teachers and students.
Obstacles, you face them in Miami, and you've said when talking about what you've accomplished in Miami in terms of more innovation, you've opened a number of schools that have this technology and that are using it and are doing well, and you have a lot of screaming about just about everything that you try to get done there. You said earlier to me that if Miami-Dade can do this, anyone can do this. Tell us a little bit about what some of the barriers you've had there and how you've overcome them.
I'd like to touch first on something that you just addressed, which is the big picture nationally. If I were to advocate for three things that can be done or must be done, first, to really realize the potential of digital convergence at a scalable level nationally across all districts in America, is number one, a need to depart from this absolutely insane mandatory textbook adoption, which is cyclical. Secondly, we need to eliminate the silos that categorize school spending, usually imposed by state legislators that say these dollars can be only used for instructional technology, these dollars must be used for textbooks. Those silos need to be abolished and need to be one single pot of funding. And thirdly, there's got to be a much more liberal approach to E-rate. E-rate is structured still on the basis of what's behind the wall, under the constraints of real wired connections. And in a digital era with cloud computing, the old rules don't apply to the new reality. Look, in Miami-Dade, when I make the point that if it can be done in Miami-Dade, it ought to be able to be done anywhere else across America, is because we are a tough district. I mean, very large, very urban, very poor, extremely diverse, where 70,000 of the 400,000 students are ELL, English language learners. And notwithstanding that, we've been able to not only dramatically improve graduation rates, narrow the achievement gap, but simultaneously expand dramatically choice and availability of high-quality technology and digital content. And the way we have approached that is, number one, through competitive grants. So we were the winners of the Race to the Top district-level competition, the largest single district award with $32 million investment. Where did we put the money? Where the research tells us is the best investment for the benefit of students. Look, the creation of blended learning environments, personalized learning environments, is nothing more than creating environments that mimic the way children and, quite frankly, adults live today. It's the way, it's not only them anymore, it's the way we entertain ourselves, the way we search for information, it's the way we educate ourselves, the way we read our news. Why would we not replicate those environments for the benefit of students? So those federal dollars put us in a position of actually scaling up dramatically what we call iPrep academies.
You have 49 of them now, is that correct?
I'm sorry?
You have 49 iPrep
Actually,
academies?
we started with one just 3 years ago, self-appointed principal of that initial iPrep academy. Following year, we grew it by 10 franchises. We trademarked the concept, by the way, but we're not selling it. So if you want to replicate it, come on down and you can copy it. But we want to make sure that quality control is imposed. And through Race to the Top, this year we opened 49 middle school iPrep academies strictly for the teaching of mathematics. With flipped learning, after 6 weeks of professional development for the teachers who manage these spaces, every child has a device and great digital content that enables students to actually understand at a deeper level, complex level, the meaning of mathematics, making it fun, allowing for acceleration, remediation in an out-of-this-world, without-bells environment. That's iPrep.
And I've seen some of the videos about it, and it sounds like the kids seem to be extremely happy about what they're learning. Yeah. It's hard to get a high school or middle schooler feeling very happy about learning math. But they were talking about how much they're loving what they're doing. What's that about?
I'm glad you recognize that. I mean, I think we got the big picture elements right. So great technology, great digital content after we really were very selective as to what would work. Addressing what the data pointed out as the greatest liabilities for us as a district. That's why we selected the greatest expansion of digital content and personalized learning in the math area in middle school. If I were to ask the superintendents or teachers or principals here, that's probably where you face a lot of the challenges. And if you are to trace back the challenges in terms of math performance in senior high school, go back and look what's happening in middle school. But we also didn't lose sight of the small elements perhaps to us that are important to kids. So the furniture, the quality of the lighting, the comfort of the seating, the noise level, the colors of the room, every detail has been observed based on research to create environments that are complemented by the digital content, by great teachers that inspire learning, that create environments, as you referenced a little earlier, that to the naked eye may seem a bit confusing because there are many different things happening simultaneously, and that is a good thing. There's group learning going on, there is acceleration, there's remediation, there's direct interaction between the child and the digital content, there's collaboration and teamwork. All of that in the same space is what must happen in classrooms across America today. And the result is happiness. Happy kids learn better. Kids who do not feel that they need to power themselves down to enter the classroom for the learning that's expected of them.
Was it difficult to get the teachers to be as enthusiastic about these new methods?
I have to say that the first iPrep Academy experience, well, you know, how often do you have the superintendent saying, you know, I'm going to create this school after I reduce administration by 64%. So you have a lot of empty space in the downtown office. I'm going to create a school here, and I'm going to be the principal of this school. And I'm going to handpick the teachers, and that's exactly what I did. We were very careful about nailing it on the first year to use the results of that high fidelity implementation as the premise for rapid expansion. So based on year one results, bringing the media, bringing a lot of folks in to look at the space, to look at the practice, and to look at the results, the student achievement results, where as a high school, in the first year, we got the second highest in the state end of course exam results in geometry and algebra. Once people understood what the model was like, then you had principals asking for the model to be replicated in their schools. They asked for franchises. We brought in teachers to the original school to be trained there alongside the principals and the staff members, the support staff. We have had no difficulty recruiting takers to engage in the process. Why wouldn't you? You're in an environment where you are liberated from annoying bells every 60 minutes. You're in an environment where over the summer, you're trained for 6 weeks with your colleagues across the district who will be managing these like environments. There's constant support for what you're doing. So there was no resistance. Yes, there was a great deal of learning. The letting go process of I am the teacher in charge and everybody will listen to me at the same time and perform at the same time, entering the pipeline at the same time and exiting out at the same time, that needs to go away. So there's a little bit of an emotional departure, but once teachers understand how empowering the new approach is, they embrace it, they thrive in it.
Plus, they got help with the color scheme and the lighting. I mean, that doesn't happen all that often.
Yeah, I mean, why must schools, and by the way, we keep creating and recreating these spaces at a much lesser investment than building a traditional school. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good thing. And why not make it fun? Why not use what the research indicates as far as color, composition, allow function to follow form and vice versa to create environments that are easily adaptable to children, to the professionals that teach in them. But again, the building itself, the technology, the device, those are just tools. The content is key. And the perfect interaction between the professional, the teacher, and the digital content must be magical. It's not an either-or proposition, it's a both-and mandate before us today.
I want to get back to the teaching and the obstacles you face, V, but I'm reminded that as much as I'm having fun asking all the questions, everybody in the audience, please feel free. You are welcome to submit questions. There's a card in your packet, and somebody from the Broad staff will come around and collect it because we really want to have a chance for you to ask them as well. You've had some obstacles, too, as a teacher, and I don't assume that you've had somebody come in to ask about your lighting and your color scheme and all of the other things that go when you're having a network.
We wish we'd have that. No.
But you still have had to overcome things to get personalized learning up and running in your classroom. How did you do that?
Well, it's looking at the appropriate digital content and ensuring that the digital content meets the needs of our students. ensuring they have the hardware. I'm glad Alberto was making sure that the hardware is there. But those were two of the huge obstacles that we've had to go through at my school. Digital content, hardware, professional development, and support.
For the teachers.
For the teachers. And ensuring that everyone has the professional development and time. Having 6 weeks of PD over the summer affords teachers the time to actually truly feel comfortable about implementing something new. But trying to implement something at the same time as you're learning it actually can bring a disconnect for what the teacher really wants to do in working with the students. So those are some of the obstacles that I think teachers are facing.
I think some people would like to know what lessons you've learned about how this can be replicated.
First, to begin with, look at the digital content that's in your school. When I first started, I looked at different programs, and we had programs in our school, and really looking at what's in the school and how it works, and we found out that we had a very, very good program in the school, and I learned more about how to use that program. Look at and talk to people who are in the know, and become a pest. I have actually become a pest in my school district. I know they probably say, here she comes. And I've learned to speak up and to ask for things, and that we've gotten. And even as far as this week, I asked for a program that our school was not slated to get. And I was told I could have it for grades 3 through 5. And I went to a training, and I said, but this works great for the entire school. And the entire school will have access to the program. And those students who attended professional development, and many of them have rearranged their schedules to show up on a Saturday morning for professional development to get the program.
So becoming a pest is
becoming a pest as a teacher, becoming a pest works very, very well.
I have found the same as a public school parent, by the way. Liz, what about for Aspire? You've learned a lot of lessons, and if you have district leaders and others who are looking for some advice about personalized learning, does it make your job easier, harder, all of the above?
Probably all of the above. I would say the barriers that we've had to overcome and we still have to overcome are largely tech related. Everything from navigating the E-rate process to getting bandwidth upgraded to wireless infrastructures to device choices to data integration, that we continue to have a lot of challenges around upgrading our technology to where it needs to be to run that many devices in the building. And what we did learn, which was a huge lesson we learned from our friends at KIPP, is that we should have somebody in the building who is dedicated to supporting teachers and students in that technology. So we have a blended learning teaching assistant in each of our schools, and they're kind of a tinkerer of sorts. So
sort of an IT specialist as well?
We had originally conceived of that person to be more teaching assistant than IT, but we've kind of lucked out. All of them have been very good at learning a lot of IT and troubleshooting a lot of IT, and so now we hire that person to fix laptops, get on the phone with software providers when there are bugs, help provision student accounts, all sorts of things that we have learned that you can't put a ton of technology in a building and expect teachers to do that work. It's just too time consuming, it can be too maddening, and most teachers know, like when the computers are down, they're just like, forget about it, I don't want to do it anymore. And we didn't want that to happen. And so those people have been absolutely critical to our implementations in schools. And they do things like teach kindergartners how to use the trackpad, or they teach teachers how to roll out a program if the teacher doesn't feel comfortable. And in this way, we've been able to build teacher tech resiliency over time. So teachers then take more and more of the responsibility and kind of the excitement about using tech in the classroom on themselves.
That's a really good point, because there's sometimes technology is changing so quickly and the programs are changing constantly. And do you have to have special training constantly for your teachers to keep them up?
So the training that we largely focus on with teachers is the training we always have, and it's been around instruction. What we've tried to do is create just-in-time training around the software programs of what do you need to know to get it off the ground, and then maybe bring in a trainer 6 weeks later of what do you need to know to be able to look at your student achievement data or finally tweak the programs. But most of what we want our teachers still focusing on is the instruction. Not what's the computer doing for the kids, but what are you doing for the kids in the classroom now that you have the support of the computer also providing instruction for kids.
And you have probably found that as well, that the teachers need some extra specialized training.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're so right. We need to stop this idea that once you bring in the technology, the device, the content, and you've trained them, you're done. And now teachers can somehow abdicate their responsibility and students are on their own. Now, it's a symbiotic relationship between the teacher, the support system for the teacher in the classroom, and the support system is both technical support system as well as the ongoing human capital development provided to the teacher, which evolves. In addition, obviously, to the maintenance of the environment. And in Miami-Dade, we actually have technicians, particularly in the iPrep environment, they are dedicated to ensuring that bandwidth performance is adequate, that the devices are up and running at all times, system checks behind the wall to ensure that there's no penetration in terms of viruses or anything that would slow down the system. In addition to the providers of the digital content on site, as we negotiated the contract, they are there on site to ensure that the implementation is being done with high fidelity. And I want to step back just one quick second, because we're doing this large scale in Miami. Not only are we doing it in 60 iPrep academies, we passed a $1.2 billion bond referendum. We won a race to the top $32 million grant, and then we still went out and sought the very low interest rate Bank of America loan to deliver on the one-to-one. We did not want to, oh wow. See, I knew Bank of America was listening. Yeah, we did not want to mortgage into 30 years the purchase of devices. So it's a short-term loan, 3 years to be parallel with the lifetime of the device. But as we did that, the very first thing we did is we ensured that through E-Rate and that we would fundraise $7 million in our community to bring in a $70 million match to guarantee ubiquitous universal Wi-Fi access. March of 2014, 100% of all schools will be under a very powerful Wi-Fi broadband access. Second thing is we scoured the country and beyond for the best approach to digital content. We made decisions regarding that. The last decision we're making, and we're under a RFI right now, is the actual device. We don't want this to be a device-led conversation. It needs to be a digital content reform in addition to an investment, a careful investment, strategic investment in human capital development so that the convergence of digital content, device, and teachers all happen simultaneously for the benefit of the kids.
That is a lot harder than it sounds. I was at the McGraw dinner last night in New York City, and they honored the founders of KIP, who've been doing some interesting things in blended learning right now and are experimenting pilots. And when they got up to accept the award, they just talked about how messy change is. And you make it sound so seamless. But John, you know this better than anyone because you're fighting all of the policy obstacles. To have a scenario like the one Alberto just described for Miami, that's not a little simple overnight change.
No, it's not simple. I think the reason it's working there and in a lot of other schools is because they're starting with the right questions. They're starting with, what does it mean for student-centric, education? What do teachers need? And then sort of building out the technology needs going out from that. Often if you start with a device, you end up asking the wrong questions by the time you get to the student and teacher needs. That maybe it's not a tablet that what a student and teacher needs, or maybe the tablet's incompatible with the content that the teacher really likes. And so you have to really start, I think, with the instructional questions and sort of work backwards. This notion, too, of technical support is the most least discussed item, I think, in a lot of the blended learning sort of discussions and most overlooked in terms of policy, but it's the most important. We have all had the experience of getting locked out of our computer or the word processor not working, and that's a nuisance to us during Absolutely. An 8-hour business day. But it's completely disruptive to a teacher who has a 45-minute class period. They don't have the luxury of waiting for 2 hours for technical support to fix it. And if the problem is, if that happens enough times, then the teacher and the student just stops trusting that particular technology. And often, you have no idea where the fault is. It could be with the software, it could be with the hardware, the wireless point, the internet access point, the district office. It doesn't matter. Like for a teacher and a student, they lump it all in the same, and if they don't trust it, they won't use it. And so you really need that technical support to help make sure that the teachers are supported and the students are supported in using this. The professional development is critical too. And I think this goes to, it's beyond just how to sort of work a device and how to access a piece of software or an online or cloud-based service. It's really about how does this become part of your day-to-day work? And how do you use it as part of your instructional routine? How does a student use it? How does a parent access it from at home? But without that sort of training, then you can have a great sort of most sophisticated hardware, the fastest internet connection, but it's not going to get used unless there's the training to go with it.
So you need the training, you need the technology, but there's also a cultural change that has to happen. You have had to see that happen because the school culture that you're teaching in now is extremely different from the school that your kids went to and you went to. How do you bring about that sort of change? What does that take?
Take some prayer and holding your breath and talking, just quite a bit of talking, quite a bit of sharing. The students are excited, so they pass the buzz on to other students who mention it to their parents. I've been fortunate where I've had results and my colleagues are asking questions, how are you getting the results you are getting? Beginning last spring, I saw phenomenal results from students who predictors indicated they would move, but they moved beyond, because I was extremely excited for them. And they're excited for themselves. And that creates a buzz that there's something new, there's something different that we need to do in the school. And having talked with my principal, and I have quite a few colleagues who are extremely effective or highly effective teachers, but we have not been moving our students to the degree in which we would like to. And everyone's on board. There must be something more that we can do as teachers in order to support our students.
Do you have a sense of how much improvement is happening in your classroom with your teachers using some of these new methods and technologies?
Not yet. We're just
it's too soon, right?
It's too soon. We're getting started. But the excitement is there. It's an excitement in the school. When you
But we're in
feel
a
the
culture
excitement.
that wants more than excitement.
We're in a culture that needs to get excited first about what we're doing, and then we can move. And so we're getting the initial reaction.
And you'll have results at the end of the school year, most likely? Or?
Hopefully we'll start seeing some results by the holiday.
And what does success look like? Is it just test scores, or are there other things that you're really looking at? Does excitement count?
It's excitement, but it's also looking at students who are excited about learning. I ran a summer camp, and my camp started at 9:30. I had students showing up at 8:30. I didn't get there until 9 o'clock. But the students were getting there early because they couldn't wait to get started, which forced me to get there early so I could meet them there. And we want students who are excited about their own learning. Mm-hmm. That's the drive. I think everything else will come if we can get our students.
So you're working in a culture, Liz, in some ways that doesn't have to overcome the obstacle of what was, because you're creating something new. How does starting with that as a whole, everybody on the same page initially, really make a difference in terms of what you're trying to accomplish?
It definitely makes it easier. One of the mandates that I had, I was given when I started this work was that whatever I piloted had to scream Aspire, that it still had to culturally fit within the organization. We couldn't create a separate school and then have two parallel systems. And so as a result, it was challenging to figure out what would fit within the program and what would really push teachers to rethink the way they were doing things. And so we created a device in which we said, okay, teachers, you're going to do 30 minutes of ELA content and 30 minutes of math content in classroom rotations in K through 5. And that's what we're requiring you to do. And what was fascinating about the 30 minutes is in some ways it was a device. We wanted kids to make progress in the software, but it also was a really interesting device to both create time where they could pull additional small groups for instruction, but it also created this interesting challenge for all our teachers in their daily schedule, that was a lot of time that we were taking away from them. And they initially would say, well, how am I supposed to make it fit? And I'm like, no, you're going to have to do things differently. You're going to have to plan differently. And as a result, they did, over time, start planning radically differently. That there is very little whole group instruction that happens in the instructional program anymore. As a result, that was something teachers decided over time as they played with this device in the middle of their schedules. But as a result, it ended up fortuitously working out for us because kids got more small group instruction. Teachers were able to iterate and innovate on their own to figure out what worked best for their kids, but we didn't have 50,000 things going on. We had some consistency across the program, which was really important to us.
And Alberto, you had to develop some strategies for change. It's such a large district, and it's not always, not everyone is receptive to these ideas. What do you think the key strategies that really helped you get to where you are with opening all of these new academies?
I want to revisit in answering your question something you touched on earlier, the whole issue of culture. Culture, the way I define culture is a set of beliefs and values that are commonly embraced by a critical mass of people, right? How do you get there? Obviously, there's got to be a catalyst. There's got to be somebody who delivers a message, a compelling vision of what can be. But a cultural shift in terms of teachers or educational leaders is not simply now observing everybody doing. No, a culture shift is everybody believing in what they're doing. Simply doing does not deliver results. Believing in what you're doing in a different way has the promise of delivering results. That's why I go back to the initial experiment of the initial iPrep as the fundamental showpiece for what could be. People saw, people experienced it, people believed the results. And then this urgency behind the replication of that success now across the district became something that people could embrace. Let me touch on something that was addressed earlier, the issue of policy. We spent quite a bit of time talking about federal and state policy specific to this national urgency in terms of digital convergence, the empowerment of children and teachers into the digital era. We don't often think about policy as something that we ourselves control. And one of the biggest challenges towards personalized learning or digital convergence actually resides with school districts, school boards, and superintendents. Unless we liberalize the BYOD, the policies that we have that restrict access, that actually have filters that filter out in an unselective way the good and the bad alike, we're not going to allow teachers to feel empowered in this new environment for learning. So if you cannot access Edmodo, if you cannot access networks, online networks that stimulate and have embedded lessons in professional development that are digitized and content, you're not going to be able to do for your kids and your teachers.
I have to fulfill my role as a journalist and ask you about skepticism, because in many of the districts that I've visited in schools and elsewhere in covering this issue and editing dozens of stories on it, you hear a lot of arguments. You guys were extremely articulate and convincing about why personalized, blended, whatever we're going to call it, learning is so effective and what some of the obstacles are that you have to overcome. But public skepticism is definitely one of those obstacles. I have heard everything from there's absolutely no evidence that this will work or that it will change education, that this is just the latest fad, to what this is really about is an agenda to replace teachers entirely with technology. I would like each of you to briefly address the skepticism that you hear about blended learning and how you argue why the skeptics should become believers. Me?
One of my favorite quotes was about insanity, and insanity is doing the same thing and expecting results. If we continue to do what we've been doing over the years in education and expect different results, that's insanity. So we have to change what we're doing. And the children that we teach today are not like the children that I taught 5 years ago. And so I have to make a change in order to reach my children, to help them grow and to learn. So I must be constantly evolving because everything else is evolving as well.
John?
So I think skepticism is actually good in a way. I think it forces us as leaders to sort of push harder in some ways and to think differently and to make sure we're addressing the concerns that parents, students, and teachers have. I think and I think there's always, with any sort of skepticism or concern or a critique, there's a kernel of truth. There's plenty of anecdotes of technology being used, not just really effectively, but also replacing teachers in a not effective way, in an inappropriate way. And technology and software and all these tools that we're talking about are just that, tools. You can use tools in a constructive way, and you can use them in a destructive way. And so, I think that goes a little bit to the conversation we're having about culture here is just so important, because unless you have that culture of innovation, and unless you're bringing the teachers and the parents and the community along with you on this journey and this conversion process to a more personalized learning environment, then you're going to lose people in that process. So, but I do think that there's a whole wave of new research coming out that's showing results, but it's showing results when the technology is used appropriately. It's the analogy I like to use is almost like an antibiotic, that if you have an antibiotic you're supposed to take for 10 days, if you take all the pills on one day and you don't get better, it's not that the antibiotic was bad, it's that the way you used it was inappropriate. And that's often what we're seeing here, is that truly the power of the tools. And I think what the superintendent was saying too is that we have a lot of policies, I think, designed with good intentions, but good intentions from several decades ago, or good intentions in terms of trying to keep children safe to some degree. But it's a little bit like the Robert Frost poem of mending walls. Like, before we built a wall, we would want to know what we're walling in and what we're walling out. In often cases, we're preventing kids from accessing, potentially very damaging and disruptive things, but we're also walling out a ton of really good quality content that they could potentially be transformative in their instructional careers. And so I think a lot of this is, again, about creating a culture and creating a sense of trust with the content, trust with the services, trust with students, parents, and teachers. I think a lot of of that is coming up recently in data conversations, and a whole group of parents not really trusting how data is being used and shared. And so all that it's not inappropriate, it's about creating that sense of trust so the parents feel more comfortable with it.
Skepticism.
I also like the skeptics, but I think it's about managing people's expectations about what we can deliver now versus what we hope and believe we'll be able to deliver in the future. That's certainly one of my big lessons learned in the first year of doing this work, was that I thought we were going to be able to do everything. And I thought for sure all that data would just come out of the programs neatly and teachers would be enlightened. And that that was not managing expectations, especially in a really data-driven instructional environment where teachers expected full data transparency, and we're just not there yet. So I think that's one piece, but I don't feel like it's a skepticism as much as it's people aren't ready for it. That we have schools that are very ready to become blended learning schools, and we have schools that are not yet ready to become blended learning schools. And it's about really understanding the potential of it, and it's about willing to take it on from a leadership perspective, and it's about having the right teachers on the bus to be able to execute it, that's where we've taken it. So certainly we have schools that are not ready to be blended learning schools, and it amazes me because many of them have since then come and visited one of our blended learning schools and really asked teachers all the hard questions and let teachers air their dirty laundry about it, and over time have become ready for it. But we don't want to convert any schools where the principal and the teachers aren't ready for it, because we're not in the business of convincing everybody to do it at this point.
That's a good point. No skepticism in Miami.
Look, I look at skepticism at two levels. There's honest skepticism that's rational and logical and asks the right questions. I agree, that's actually a very good thing. And then there's dishonest skepticism that's leveraged for the political advancement of an ideology, a group of people, that seek to separate rather than unify around something that makes sense for kids. So the way I hear that second type of skepticism is, technology, it's technology versus teachers, for example. That personalized learning happens at the expense of great teaching and the social interaction between the inspired and inspiring teacher and the learner. Can't be. And it's not what this revolution, what this reform is about. Secondly, the skepticism is often around this idea that somehow digital convergence or personalized learning or a flipped learning environment or a blended learning model is the reform itself. No, it's an element of educational reform. In my opinion, a needed element of educational reform, but it isn't the one element solution. You still need to address effective teaching, effective leadership, engaging communities, all of that. And I think sometimes we bring about the demise of great ideas when we oversimplify what it is, when we allow the voice of a few to permeate the vacuum created by the majority that fails to speak about these issues, and when we polarize the discussion. It is, and if I said it in Spanish, you'd like it even more. So I think there's two levels of skepticism. We've dealt with it ourselves, but here's what I know. While the adults debate the issue, the kids have moved on. They have abandoned the Titanic. They have. And unless we want to be the guy left in a boiler room, hoping that somehow things look okay here. Okay, I don't see water coming in yet. The kids have already left. They say, it's not working for me. I am bored. You have to make it more adaptive to who I am and adaptable. You have to keep me excited. And you have to make it more real, as they say. Make it more real. And the whole, if you were to ask kids, and I ask kids every day in these iPrep environments, why is this different? Number one, they say, I want to be here. This is real. As you said, I'm happy. I'm comfortable. My butt doesn't hurt because the seating is different. You don't get on my back because I sit in a beanbag with headphones on, but I'm listening to Mandarin Chinese, okay, at my own pace. And at the same time, I have somebody who's caring, who's not tied up to a whole class, that when I have a real issue, a question over something I do not understand, that person can dedicate 100% of her time or his time to me and not the entire classroom. The only way to get to that environment that addresses the whole at the same time as the individual, addresses the picture as well as the pixel at the same time, is through personalized learning. Kids understand it. We have a difficult time gravitating towards it. But unless we find common ground, and in fact we embrace the new research that's coming out, we're not going to get there. And this is no longer the impossible, it is actually the inevitable.
So we've addressed a little bit about teachers. We've addressed, the kids are already there, clearly. We have an excellent question from the audience about parents, and that is, how much of a learning curve has there been for parents in terms of, when they encounter personalized and blended learning, obstacles there, need to convince them that this is really going to make a difference for their kids and going to be better? Anyone?
For me, I think one of the obstacles, I've had parents who were very interested and very supportive. Unfortunately, all of our students do not have connectivity at home, so they cannot continue what they're getting in the classroom at home. I've even had parents last year who went online with their students, and I had a parent write a note thanking me because there were things that she did not learn when she was a student. But having worked with her daughter online, she was able to remember 5th grade math. So I think it's making a difference. I have yet to have any pushback from any parents as of yet.
Pushback from parents, anyone else?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the same tools that are empowering teachers can also, in many ways have a parent side about empowering parents as well. I think you have, we talk about a generation of students, we also have a new generation of parents that increasingly are checking their finances online, they're checking all these accounts online, and they want to be able to log on and access their kids' accounts online too. And I think that's a very little thing, but sort of involving the parents that way. I think this notion of connectivity to the home is increasingly going to be a tension point. This is something that's it's a tension point being felt right now in the E-rate conversations, because E-rate has traditionally always funded buildings, and not all buildings, just instructional buildings and libraries. But increasingly, as you're bringing in tablets and laptops, often that have some sort of wireless service that's part of it, there's this notion of, classroom models, the flipped classroom, and a lot of blended learning and online learning that takes place not just in a school building, but on school buses, in libraries, in Starbucks, and also at home. And so this connectivity, it's not enough to just have a school connected. You need to have the student connected, and connected in ways that allows them to participate in that learning model whenever. And that has a lot of, I think, auxiliary benefits too, in terms of helping to sort of bring parents along. The Khan Academy talks a lot about how kids bringing home Khan Academy assignments, and the parents are learning math. The parents are learning, other assignments, finances, and other things as part of it too. So this can be a great opportunity, not just to empower and help improve student learning, but to help really empower parents and to help improve their learning too. So this is all about sort of human capital reform in many ways.
We also have parents with connectivity challenges, and where parents are online, parents have said to us, what can my child do at home? My child's playing on the computer, and it's a great question for us to really think about, what do we want kids doing at home if kids are going to do math in their spare time? That a few years ago we ran a pilot where we just gave every third grade parent in a school a username and password for their child for a math program. And we had a surprising, I'd say almost staggering number of kids doing math in their free time. We did not reward it or punish it. We just wanted to see what happened. And we had 2 little third grade boys that over the course of 3 months had done upwards of 3,000 math problems each, which was thrilling to us. So I think there is potential. Certainly this past summer, parents asked us, can we keep doing the programs at home this summer? And it was kind of the first moment where we thought, oh my gosh, we've paid for them. This is a great way to extend the learning and figure out if we can combat summer slide with our students. So we had a group of students who stayed on the computers for the summer where they had connectivity, and we're eager to kind of analyze that data and figure out what effect, if any, it did have on kids' learning over the summer.
3 quick things in terms of parents. Number one, there is no initiative that we launched in Miami-Dade that does not have a parallel track to the Parent Academy, so the College for Parents that we created about 5 years ago. If we introduce a new series, if we introduce new digital content, if we open the district up for Discovery Learn, for example, or whatever we bring in, there is a parallel approach to the Parent Academy. Very successful. And by the way, Parent Academy is not subsidized through tax dollars. It's all through philanthropic and grants. It's about $3 to $4 million per year. Secondly, we've noticed something very interesting in Miami. So when we talk about skepticism, there is no skepticism from parents who live in digital deserts in our community. So parents who live along with their children in areas where there is no connectivity, there is no connection at home to the internet, there are no digital resources available to them, they actually see the availability elsewhere and they say, when am I going to get that? Even when they don't know exactly how to ask for it, they know there's a difference between the availability of technology and content in their children's school, because it's non-existent at home, and they recognize that. Where I see a little bit more of skepticism is actually in zip codes and schools where parents raised children with multivariate access to content, literacy from early age, digital content, multiple devices always available to them. The transformation there is not as dramatic because these children, whether it's in school or outside of school, they have access. They're plugged in, they're connected. So where we are investing, obviously, a great deal of resources with parents is in accelerating that convergence at the home. And anecdotally, the first time we send devices home with the child, who goes into a home where there was no connectivity to begin with. And by the way, we make sure that through the models, through the private sector models, that the child goes home with a device and the device is connected at a very reasonable price, and there are different models across the country for that. That device and the content, the opportunity, is not restricted to the child. Now the device is a window for the entire family. And now you see the parents themselves registering for online adult learning programs, whether it's ESOL programs, employability programs. It becomes a novelty of use for the family, and that's exactly what we want to stimulate.
Probably all fighting over the device too,
Probably
at the
so.
same time. There's something that an audience member wondered that I'd really love to hear one of you from a school or district perspective discuss, and that's what's the ability of blended learning to address one of the other new buzzwords in education, social emotional learning. Can blended learning play a role?
Yes. I would say yes, just because I've seen students who were traditionally not considered students who had a strong work ethic. I've actually seen them become empowered. And when they become empowered behind their academic performance, their sociability has improved. I've seen quite a few arguments over the years. I'm sure some of you have been in classrooms, and students are, I want to say, less sensitive to remarks once they become empowered by what they can do. And I do believe the personalization of them and the ownership of their learning has helped them socially as well.
We very much saw this with middle schoolers, that I kept going back to our middle school teachers to say, why is this so much harder in middle school than elementary school? And the teachers would say, because middle school is a time of great drama, and the second that something goes wrong with the technology, everybody falls apart. And they said the big game changer in middle school was when students started really owning their own data. And they would check their data online, and teachers would set them up to every week to look at their data and reflect on their data and then goal set around their data. And it was this moment where students were like, oh, if I work really hard and I put in a bunch of effort, my data goes up. And it was like the moment where things clicked for them, both in the sense of an ownership of their learning, but also that their learning was truly personalized and not public. That in middle school, everything is so incredibly public and social, and it was this moment where students could, if they were struggling readers, have that not be completely public within, because they're within the locus of their screen and their relationship with the teacher. And that was hugely powerful around school culture. Like, it very much changed how middle school felt for a lot of kids who had felt very disenfranchised and very marginalized.
It can be an awful age.
Yeah.
Just awful.
You know, one other way that I think this, and you see this in technology sort of, or games, I think, specifically, but that, you know, learning comes not with the absence of struggle, but with struggle. But it's the right amount of struggle, and that's what builds resiliency and with grit. And if you've ever played Angry Birds, and I bet some people are playing Angry Birds in the audience. I know. Okay, I'll give you a chance to turn it off. But, like, you know that frustration, right? You can't knock, you know, no matter how many birds you throw at a rock, but that frustration and that struggle makes you keep trying again and trying different approaches. And they get you in this like psychological sweet spot where 3 hours later you're still playing Angry Birds. And I think for the first time, we're able to sort of introduce that in education settings now. So there's a nonprofit called ST Math that does this in terms of teaching math, and it does it through games and simulations, but it creates a sense of struggle. And then it gets at this issue too of some of that is public. So there's a sense of accomplishment that can be shared with peers, with parents, with teachers, often with a badge of some sort. so levels or different things that you accomplish, but a lot of it can be private too. And that's, I think that's true for a lot of us with learning, not just in middle school, but I still have nightmares about being called on in 10th grade math class and sort of not knowing the answer and how embarrassing that is. So, and that's true in a lot of different settings. So having that sort of private accomplishment as well as sort of controlling what can be publicly shared, I think builds a sense of, it helps build the culture we were all talking about, but it also helps with this emotional issues of grit and resilience and all the things that sort of drives hard work and helps with student success later.
Yeah, and just to tap onto that, I had this interesting conversation with a teacher who said, this student's really struggling with the program. This program is wrong for this student. And I went in and looked at the data, and the data suggested the student was really in the middle of the pack. And I was like, I don't get it. I'm looking at the data, and she said, well, I just have to sit there and constantly help the student. And I was like, this is the moment when the student needs to struggle, and the data will show us the student is struggling. And if that is the case, that it's the wrong program, we'll find the right program for the student, but you need to let the kid struggle first. And we believe really strongly in this idea of having kids struggle productively.
What I will add to what I think has been a very actually interesting conversation about social emotional benefits or not personalized learning is this. In a traditional classroom setting of, let's say, 25 kids, we know what happens. Some get it, some don't get it, some are absolutely disengaged from the moment they walk in. Some are actually emotionally hurt over the fact that they see others getting it, but they don't. And often, and this is not just specific to personalized learning, but a classroom that is now reflective of differentiated instruction, where the whole is addressed, but not at the expense of the individual, is a classroom that is actually injuring some children. We've seen this. I mean, there's actually a lot of research that substantiates that. So personalized learning, for me, does have a huge impact on the social and emotional stability of children, because it allows for a process by which the approach meets children where they are, not where we believe they ought to be. And secondly, regardless of where they are, it provides a pathway for them to follow and proceed, often dictated by a pace that there is their own, but monitored and encouraged by an expert teacher. And I think it's this fine balance between the approach that is centered on the child within a social context still of an environment, let's call it a classroom or a learning space, but that does not put children at a disadvantage that is not overcomable. So I absolutely agree that a healthy struggle is healthy, but unfortunately there are kids who literally and figuratively often sit in the back of the classroom and they never move up. They never move up literally, and figuratively, academically, they never move on. And unless you find a way of individually penetrating into that child and providing a viable way that they see works for them, that they can own, that they can take pride in without feeling bad that they were the ones who didn't get it. So if you can connect that, then you're onto something big. And I cannot think of anything more empowering for that to happen than personalized learning, than differentiated instruction that strikes a balance between the individual needs of kids and the social good of the classroom of learners.
I just want to add too, it also extends outside of the classroom because the families get involved in what their children are doing. And that's also, I'm seeing more parents coming back into the classroom and being involved with what their students are doing. And it's nice when a child can go home and tell a parent, this is what I'm learning, this is what I'm doing, look here. And that, I think that is also helping with students.
But Liz, you described a situation where a student was sort of stuck and you wanted the student to stay there or to figure it out, to get to the next level. One audience member wonders about the negative implications of tracking in blended learning. So if you're stuck in a program like that, I mean, do you just keep waiting until you find something that works? I mean, how does it?
Oh no, I think we are constantly monitoring the achievement data. I think that's one of the great things about blended learning. Certainly if a student is stuck, the data shows us the student is stuck and we can actually do something about it. It's no longer this subjective, the kid is stuck moment, but if a student is not making progress in a program, we move the student to a different program. Certainly we go in and diagnose it first to figure out, where is the student stuck? Is this just a misconception or a series of misconceptions, or is it truly a bad match for the student with the program?
Is that something that happens in Miami as well, or?
I don't, so the tracking, no. When I first was listening to your question, you know, in environments and systems, schools or systems that don't provide for the personalized learning approach that we're discussing, what you get really is a set of data that in fact, because it is not that sophisticated, lends itself easily to putting kids into buckets, right? So this set of kids perform at this quartile, and this set of kids fell in this quartile, and all kids will fall eventually into one of 4 quartiles, right? And is it not time for us to depart from that? Are we not sophisticated enough at a time when stock market variations are measured in millisecond time intervals that measure slight, ever so slight, minuscule variations in prices that trigger responses automatically, right? Still monitored by humans. In education, what do we do? What have we done? Because it is easy to bucket kids in terms of performance, usually into quartiles. Then the strategy is towards the quartile. And what I'm simply saying is that we are smart enough, there are systems that are smart enough to in fact address the child as the individual that the child is, rather than just a cohort that she or he finds himself in. And I think that's the direction that we ought to take. By the way, it just hit me that I keep looking at the 4 superintendents in the front, and I thought last year, as I was there, I have no idea what people on stage were talking about. So I'm going to test Terry Greer after this, or Frank. I said, what did I say?
I think they were taking bets on whether Miami was going to finally be a bride instead of a bridesmaid. That's
yeah,
what
the
they were
Susan
doing.
Tucci.
In the remaining time that we have left, I have such a great question that I'd really like each of you, and John, you can answer this one based on visiting classrooms that you've been into for this work. This is a great question for me because it's what we try to do at the Hechinger Report: visit classrooms, see what's going on, explain what's happening. There's someone who wants you to take us through a little bit through a typical day. How does the day unfold in a blended learning classroom? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? You want to start with that, Bea?
Are we talking now in September, or are we talking in December?
Tomorrow.
Okay. Tomorrow. My students are adjusting to a station rotation. They actually visit 2 stations a day. Someone coming into the room will say, okay, there are kids everywhere. I have students on beanbags. I have a small futon. There are students with headphones on the computer. There are students who are writing and they're talking. I may be in a corner with 1 student or 3 students, and it looks like a hubbub. That's the way it looks.
You have 22 students.
I have 22 students. But if someone were to walk around and then listen over a shoulder or to sit down, they would see that the students have a purpose in what they were doing, and they're beginning to own their purpose. It's nice. It's not as quiet as I would like my room to be, but I like what's happening in my room, and I know that's going to come in time. And I had a parent come in yesterday. I have an open door policy, and she sat and she videotaped, and she looked at me on her way out and said, I wish all 3 of my students were in your class. And that let me know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Even though it's only this 3rd week of
It's
school.
only the 3rd week of school, and it was a little loud. Yes.
Liz, and then I'll let John tell us.
Well, we started school back in the 1st week of August, so we've been in school a little longer. I think if you walked into a blended learning classroom, you would see the teacher at the U table doing a small group guided reading lesson. You would see probably 8 to 10 kids with headphones on along the wall on the computers doing some sort of activity, some sort of adaptive software. And then you'd probably see groups of students on the floor doing a variety of different independent literacy activities, whether they're doing silent independent reading, or they're doing, they could be in teams doing buddy read, or they could be at a listening station where they've got a CD player and they're listening to a book and following on a book. And I would say it's quieter because it makes a better environment for kids to be reading. But then after 30 minutes, 20, 30 minutes, everybody would get up. It's like hopefully no more than 60 seconds of chaos, probably more like 2 minutes. Then everybody would move to the next station. It would calm down. New kids would be on the computers. New kids would be with the teacher, and new kids would be on the floor. And that would happen over the course of an hour and a half.
Can I just add very quickly? So you'd see all of that in our classrooms. Just one additional thing that I didn't hear mentioned. You probably would see a kid on the treadmill with headphones on, looking into a screen, doing the mile at the same time as they're doing algebra or reading Shakespeare, in addition to everything else. Because we really wanted to create a space, and if you've seen iPrep, that's very evident.
Yeah.
A space where lifestyle is not only seen, but it's lived in the school. And we try to depart from this, again, silo living. No, I mean, if you want to jog at or cycle at the same time as you're reading, why not?
It's a multitasking society.
Absolutely.
Are they allowed to text as well at the same time?
We don't, they are. We encourage them to bring their devices to school.
That's not something that's allowed in a lot of school districts still.
That's why I wanted to bring up the issue of BYOD. When we say don't do this, what else are you filtering out in addition to, yes, some of the dangers and some of the issues that we ought to be cautious about, but way too often the size of the filter is too small to allow the good stuff in.
John, you've seen some digital learning classrooms.
Two words that normally that sort of complement what we just heard. You see activity and you feel energy. So, and it's, the one sort of issue just sort of tease out is that you see lots of activities. You see students working individually, you see students in small groups, and then you see teachers working more one-on-one with the kids that are struggling and need a little bit more one-on-one help in sort of another sort of small group setting. But that's the type of differentiated learning you just don't get in sort of a bell curve class with a teacher teaching right to the middle. The other thing that increasingly I'm seeing is like a completely redesigned sense of class design and use of time. So classes can be longer. They're not just 45 minutes. They could be 90 minutes or even 100 minutes. And it gets a little bit to the superintendents too that comments, and I think with some of the charter schools that you visit and also some other schools, a complete sense of redesigning the classroom, that these types of classes don't lend themselves to desks being in a row 5 rows deep and 6 across. Like it's really sort of about having clusters, lots of color and activity, lots of other activities, and it's just a lot of energy. But throughout it, you see excitement and students learning, I think.
So we've touched on a lot of themes today, and teaching, learning, obstacles, what happens to kids in the classroom, what does it look like? And it's been a really interesting and productive discussion, even if the superintendents who are waiting on the Broad Prize have not heard anything that we've said, and that's fine. And I want to thank you all, and to really keep thinking about this. It's one of the cliches that we really hate as education journalists, that people talk about how there's no silver bullet. And I think what we're talking about here is not the solution, it's a potential solution with obstacles, with real problems, with the need to train teachers, to have parents buy in, to have the technology work. It's really, really a critical piece of it. And we have an opportunity to have technology used as a really powerful catalyst for change. So we really all appreciate your sharing those views with the audience. And I know some of you will be around available hopefully for questions afterwards at the reception, because we've run out of time. But I wanted to thank you all very much for being with us this morning, and I'm going to turn the program over to Greg McGinnis. Thanks, Greg.
So thank you, Liz, for being a great moderator, and Alberto, Liz, John, and V, thanks so much for joining us today. So that concludes our panel. We'll take a 30-minute break. And we'll start our announcement event here promptly at 11 a.m. You'll find refreshments in the adjacent Whitehall room, which is out the door to your left and down the hall. And we look forward to seeing you in about 30 minutes. Thank you.